Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Marty Ross, and tonight is another Conversations with Marty Ross MD. As you all know, this is a webinar where we're going to talk about Lyme disease, and what we talk about is based on the questions that you ask. So as usual, I'm interested in seeing what you have in store for me tonight. For those of you that are new here, welcome. I'm glad to see a number of new names on my message board. And for those of you who are coming back, I'm glad to see that you're here too. I see a number of names I recognize there as well too. And I hope that means that you're getting value. I think it probably does because you keep coming back. So that's good. So for those of you that are new, the way you participate, there's two ways. One is you can listen to the questions as I read them. And if you're in the live webinar, I actually post them on the screen so you'll be able to see them too. And so follow those questions and see what responses I give. There's some good learning and some good information you get that will probably give you some ideas for your treatment, things you can discuss with your clinicians about if you want to do it that way too. The other way is to actually write a question to me. And so on the bottom right-hand side of your computer is a chat box, and you can write your question to me through that chat box. One thing I ask is that you don't hit the enter key until the whole question is written. If you do hit the enter key multiple times to create paragraphs, it actually sends separate questions my direction, and it gets hard for me to go and piece those together from my side when I try to present the question to the whole group. So please don't hit that enter key until the whole question is written. Just write your question as one big long run-on paragraph. As usual, I am creating a recording of the webinar tonight, and tomorrow morning, somewhere between 9:30 a.m. Seattle time, so Pacific Standard Time, I will wind up sending an email out announcing that the recording has been edited and is ready for you to see. And I usually send out a synopsis of what we talked about so that you can kind of see if you want to go back and listen to it again or not, okay? The one thing I ask when I do send that out tomorrow morning, forward it to people that you think may get benefit. Many of you have people that you know that have Lyme, you have Lyme, or your family members have Lyme, and you probably know other people. And if you're getting benefit from my webinars, other people will get benefit as well too. So share what we're doing here in terms of either when I send out the email asking you for you to watch the video, which also has a link to sign up for the next week's webinar, or when I send out my weekly announcements that we're going to have a webinar tomorrow, forward those to people. That helps me reach more people because my goal is to help as many people as possible. All right. All right. So without any further ado, let's go ahead and get started here. So first question is from Jake. Hi, Jake. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Ross. Do you ever recommend using olive leaf extract to treat yeast? Also, when you refer to intestinal yeast, are you referring to a certain type of yeast like Candida? Thanks for doing another great webinar. Thank you. So, when I talk about yeast in the intestines and intestinal yeast overgrowth, I'm talking about Candida albicans is the primary Candida strain that I'm talking about. And so, what I get concerned about, the reason we get concerned about too many yeast in the intestines is that when you have too many yeast in your intestines, they trigger the immune system to overproduce a group of inflammatory chemicals called cytokines. And those cytokines are the same kind of cytokines that get made when you have Lyme living in you as well, too. So if you have Lyme, you already probably have too many cytokines. If you have yeast, that adds to the cytokines. And cytokines are what give you most of your Lyme symptoms. So Lyme symptoms are actually excess cytokine symptoms. So that brain fog that people get, body pain that people get, fatigue that people get, dysfunction of the brain, hormonal dysfunction, aches and pains, those are all due to too many cytokines. And if you get too many yeast in the intestines, they add to that cytokine pool. So in my practice, I do screening at the beginning of a visit or beginning of first time I see somebody. I want to make sure they don't have too many yeast to begin with. And the way that I screen for that is with a screening tool that you can find on my website. I'll show it to you here in a minute. But if you score over 140 in my screening tool, there's a good chance you have too many yeast in the intestines. And I like to work to get rid of them right away, okay? So I want to make a distinction too. I often get asked, do you think I have systemic yeast? And the answer is no. People don't get systemic yeast. What they get is systemic effects of yeast in their intestines, okay? So I hope you heard the word I use. I said systemic effects, Not that yeast is living throughout the body, but rather it's living in the intestines, where it triggers these cytokines that get made by all the white blood cells in the intestines. Those cytokines get into your bloodstream and go out and cause system-wide effects, okay? And so we want to keep those cytokines down, so we work on getting your yeast out, basically, all right? And that is Candida albicans. Now, in terms of natural ways that you can treat yeast, there are a number of herbal anti-candida, anti-yeast herbs, and they tend to be powder caprylic acid, rosemary oil, thyme oil, clove oil. Any volatile oils can do it. Indolicic acid, and I think I just send all of those there. I know that olive leaf extract has some anti-yeast properties, but I wouldn't call it a strong one. So I don't base my herbal anti-yeast treatments on olive leaf extract. I like using pills that have combinations of powder caprylic acid, indolicic acid, thyme oil, oregano oil. Garlic's another option. Grapefruit seed extract is an option. And usually can find some kind of products that have a number of those together. So for instance, one of the products I like using is a product made by Karuna called Capri Plus. That's caprylic acid, garlic, and oregano oil. It's a good product. 2 pills twice a day. Okay. The other option is a product made by Integrative Therapeutics I like using. That's called Phytostan. And Phytostan has in it some powder so caprylic acid, rosemary oil, thyme oil, and indolicic acid. Okay. So that's another option. I usually don't use olive leaf extract as part of what I do. Okay. All right. Thanks for that question, Jake. Everyone, I'm going to do a quick screen share here and show you how you can determine if you might have too many yeast living in you, especially at the beginning of your treatment. So let me go ahead and do that. I'm going to do a quick screen share here. All right. And so, so this is my Lyme information site, Treat Lyme by Marty Ross MD. Under this tab is my whole online Lyme guide. It has all kinds of articles about what you could do for certain problems. And so in here is a section on yeast. And in the section on yeast, there is an article I have called A Silent Problem Is It Yeast? And here it gives you information and resources you can use to figure out, do you have too many yeast, okay? So if you click here, you're going to wind up seeing a link in this article that is my yeast screening questionnaire. You just click on that. You read this, fill out the blanks, put a score in, add it all up, and if it scores over 140, there's very high probability you probably have too many yeast in your intestines, okay? All right. All right, I think that took care of that. All right, so, oh, wait a minute, it's still on. Hold on here a minute, guys. I gotta see where I am. Oh, okay, got it. I hope you were able to see that. I'm not sure if my little screen share showed up. Let me do this again. So here's my article. It's called A Silent Problem Is It Yeast? Scroll down and click on this yeast screening questionnaire here, okay? And that basically is the article for that, okay? All right. All right, let's see here. Hello, Jim. Hi, Dr. Ross. Thanks for doing these great webinars. You're welcome. It seems long COVID has things in common with myalgia encephalitis and chronic fatigue syndrome, and ME/CFS has a lot in common with chronic Lyme. So are there things that you have learned from treating long COVID that have provided you further insights to treating chronic Lyme? You know, I wouldn't say it that way. I would say that there's things I use from treating chronic Lyme that I use on my long COVID. It's the other way around. My working with chronic Lyme has informed the things I'm going to think about in treating long COVID. And I think we're still learning about what long COVID is. I know there's a number of theories out there, but I still think we're learning about what it is. But basically, when I've got somebody that has long COVID, I want to do similar things to what I do with my Lyme patient. I want to make sure they're getting sleep. I want to do things to support their adrenal glands. I want to have them on herbs and supplements to lower those inflammation cytokines, because in long COVID, they probably have too many cytokines. I want to do things to help support and repair the cell energy factories, which are called mitochondria. And the other things that I may wind up using is low-dose naltrexone seems to have given some benefit in terms of helping people with some of the pains that they have, but also in helping people balance the immune system so that it might turn the ship around for them. Okay, so I like working with that. People with long COVID often have some mast cell activation, so I'll do things related to that I use in the world of Lyme. And also people with long COVID sometimes have a lot of POTS symptoms. So they have imbalance between the adrenaline and anti-adrenaline parts of the body, causing racing and skipping of the heart, causing easy fainting, for instance, causing air hunger, causing fatigability. And so the things I would do to support those that I know from the world of Lyme, I would wind up using in long COVID as well, too. All right. Beyond that, I don't have anything else to add. There isn't anything special I'm doing other than supporting people through the journey at this point. Okay. All right. Thanks for that question, Jim. Good luck to you. Hello, Alexander. Hello, Dr. Ross. I was on mold binders for 6 months and I had to stop due to side effects. I did lower my toxicity levels, but not completely. Once I restart the binders again, I will be taking a 2-month break. Will I begin where I left off in regards to the levels of mycotoxins, or do the toxins replicate like Bartonella Babesia? If they do replicate, how fast is their replication? I hope I do not need to start from ground zero again. Thank you. All right. Good question. But they're separate issues. Okay. So germs replicate, toxins don't replicate. I'll just cut right to the chase on that. All right. So many of you may know when it comes to the Bartonella and Babesia infections, I suggest people try not to stop in the middle of a treatment, because those germs repeat themselves, replicate themselves every 24 hours. And in those periods that you're off your antibiotics, the germ's going to grow back real quickly. Okay. That's different than mold toxicity disorder. And so what happens in mold toxicity is there's 25% of us that have a genetic programming mistake, where when we breathe in mold toxins from the world around us, we breathe them in, they get absorbed into our bloodstream. And in the people with the genetic programming mistake, their immune system doesn't correctly handle the toxins and doesn't break them down. Okay. And because they don't get broken down within the bloodstream, these toxins get trapped in you. All right. In 75% of people, what happens is we breathe in a mold toxin, it gets into our bloodstream. Some of our immune cells will come in and tag those mold toxins, and then other immune cells will come in and break the mold toxins down, and we never have trouble with them again. All right. Now, for these mold toxins, once they're in you, they're not replicating, they're just there. So if you stop in the middle of trying to remove this swimming pool of toxins in you, what's left in that pool is still there, but it's not being added to from a replication of the toxins. Okay. Now, having said that, there's one thing I do need to make you aware of. So if you are still living in an environment that exposes you to mold toxins and you're off your binders, you could be gathering some more toxins in you. Okay. Or there's a small group of people that get mold toxicity that, in addition to having breathed in the toxins from their environment, a small percentage of people also breathe in the mold spores from their environment. And those mold spores can colonize their nose passages and colonize your intestines in small amounts. And then they start being a place where those mold spores can produce toxins that you then breathe in and get trapped in your bloodstream. Okay. All right. But the majority of people don't have that problem. And the majority of people, hopefully, when you start treating your mold toxicity, you've moved out of your moldy home, or you've had your moldy home remediated so that you're not continuing to be in an environment that the environment adds to your mold toxins. So if you live in a clean environment and you don't have mold toxin or mold spores creating toxins up in your nose or your intestines, and you stop using your binders, you're not going to keep there's nothing that's adding. There's no replication that takes place, and there's no environmental exposures that add to it. When you resume your binders, you're just going back to where you left off in terms of the amount of toxins to get out of you. Okay? All right. Good question. Thanks for that. Good luck to you, Alexander. Hello, Albert. See, hi, Dr. Ross. Dr. Neil Nathan talks about how most of the patients in this practice that have mold toxicity are also colonized for mold. I know he works with very sensitive people, but do you find this to be true in your practice? In general, do you tend to agree with Dr. Nathan about mold, or are there points of departure? Also, can't I take Capri Plus or Phytostan long-term to keep yeast from getting out of control? Or can yeast develop resistance to these herbs if taken for a long time? All right, let me start with the last part of that. So the Capri Plus and the Phytostan, I mentioned those earlier tonight. Generally herbal antimicrobials, whether it's herbal anti-yeast medicines or herbal antibacterials that we use for Lyme and Bartonella and Babesia, for those things, I tend not to see resistance develop that easily to those. It's possible, but generally I tend not to see that happen, okay? All right. In terms of Dr. Nathan, so Dr. Nathan has a practice where basically he's taking care of the sick with mold toxicity. And so he attracts people that are really super sick, and probably attracts a group of people that have tried standard treatments and just not gotten better. Those people probably are colonized, okay? But in a practice like mine, where I look for mold toxicity as part of managing Lyme disease, what I have to tell you is the majority of time that I treat somebody for mold toxicity, all I have to use is binders to get the mold toxins out. And I usually never, for the great majority, maybe 90% of people I treat for mold toxicity, I do not put them on agents to kill mold spores up in the nose or mold spores in the intestines, okay? So we have two different populations that we're treating, all right? And I would say for the average person is not colonized. Keep in mind, Dr. Nathan has a very skewed practice because of what he does, basically. All right. So, for instance, I'll give you a couple stories on that. So, one of the persons that was probably one of the sickest people I've ever seen in managing Lyme disease is a woman that was in her 20s, had been doing missionary work down in New Zealand, and got a tick bite, bullseye rash, strong testing that showed Lyme. And basically, by the time she came to see me, was having daily seizures that would cause her to stop breathing. She had pain that was so bad that narcotics would not manage it. Extreme fatigue. I mean, just bad shape. And the story was very classic for Lyme. She had a tick bite, a bullseye rash, testing that came back positive. And so it all looked like Lyme. And this is when this was early. This is when I wasn't that aware of mold toxicity, because none of us really were aware of mold toxicity back then. And so anyhow, she's very sick. And so we wound up working with oral antibiotics and eventually IV antibiotics. And over the course of about 2.5 years, she only got 15% better. And I kept scratching my head about what am I missing here? And it was around that time that I learned about Dr. Shoemaker's work and his idea that some people can have mold toxins trapped in them. And so what I did is before our next visit, I suggested, without testing, because all we had back then was Shoemaker's genetic test, and I didn't think it was that accurate of a test. And I said, let's just try this cholestyramine stuff before your next visit and see, maybe you develop some toxicity along the way, and we're not aware of it. And so by the time we did our next visit, this is a person, again, that went from basically she was having daily seizures, stopped breathing, pain so bad narcotics would not touch it. I mean, that was still that bad when we added in the cholestyramine. Within 3 weeks, she's up out of bed, smiling, no more body pains or pains that were like 90% better. In other words, 3 weeks of cholestyramine changed her world, all right? 3 weeks. And what we wanted to do, I think we did binders with her for about 6 months total, then we stopped. And she got well, she got 100% well. these days and so I never did anything to deal with colonization in her, right? And what we discovered years down after she got well, she started thinking more about her environment. And she noticed that when she was living down in New Zealand and she had gotten this tick bite, she was also living in a building that was full of black mold on the walls. And she just I didn't think to ask her because I wasn't aware of it at that time. And she just wasn't aware of it. But in retrospect, what I wonder is how much of this was really Lyme in her and how much of it had really mainly been mold toxicity, okay? So here's another story. So I had a patient that came to see me maybe about 5 years ago that came in and had basically just terrible shape. He couldn't think anymore. He had lost his job, terrible fatigue, had Lyme testing that was done by another colleague of mine here in town. And she had told him that he was so bad, he had such bad cognitive dysfunction that he needed to get on a jet plane, fly out to see Dr. Jemsek out in Washington, D.C., and get on IV antibiotics right away. I mean, she used the word right away. And so his mom's a nurse, and she just wanted a second opinion. So they came to see me, and I just took his story. I just took his history, and I learned after my patient that got it in New Zealand to always, as part of the beginning of my treatments with somebody, is to try to ascertain what is their risk of mold exposures. Okay, and so yeah, he had a positive Lyme test, and he had symptoms consistent with Lyme. But remember, those are all excess cytokine symptoms, and mold toxicity triggers excess cytokines. Okay, so anyhow, I took his story, and basically he was doing well until he moved into a house that was full of black mold. So this other doctor had never asked him his history, right? So his history told me, wow, we better think about black mold, all right? Even though I had a positive Lyme test. So basically, its test came back just full of mold. He was full of mold toxins. And we did binders for 6 months. He was well and on his way, and I never gave him anything to treat Lyme. Didn't even have to go after it, okay? Because his immune system may have dealt with it. So a positive Lyme test doesn't mean that the immune system hasn't dealt with it. It just means your immune system reacted to it, okay? And I never put him on any antifungals. He wasn't colonized, all right? And so the majority of patients in my practice here are people that I just have to put on binders to remove the swimming pool of toxins that got trapped in them. And they're people that are not colonized with a mold spores, all right? Now, there are a group of people that I will wind up doing it. My approach is get people on binders, follow them over a 4 to 6 month period of time. If they're not doing much better at about 4 to 6 months, retest and see have we had any changes in the mold toxin levels. And I do that with a urine mold toxin test, usually through real-time labs these days. And if the urine mold toxin test on the retest is not doing better, and if they are not doing better, then I'm going to add something in to start killing for mold spores. But that only happens about 10% of the time. Okay. Yeah. So anyhow, I don't disagree with Dr. Nathan. I think he has a different population that he treats than I do. Okay. All right. Good luck to you, Albert. Hello, TJ. Let's see. Anything to help light sensitivity? When I have people with extreme light sensitivity, I am thinking, in addition to Lyme, I'm thinking of Bartonella. So one thing is make sure you're treating the right infections, okay? So keep in mind, Bartonella can cause a lot of neurologic agitation, and light sensitivity is a form of neurologic agitation, basically, okay? And so to help figure out if you might have Bartonella, look at symptoms that would seem to indicate that. So in addition to the normal brain fog that people get, body pain and fatigue and insomnia that we see with Lyme, people with Bartonella have another subset of symptoms that kind of point us in that direction. So the Bartonella symptoms that I want to focus on to see if they're there to help me determine clinically is Bartonella there include having pain on the balls of the feet, having rashes that look like scratch or stretch marks. Air hunger sometimes can feel like you can't get enough air from time to time, sometimes can be part of Bartonella. People with Bartonella often have a lot of neuropsychiatric issues, so they may have a lot of ongoing persistent anxiety, depression. They may have tremors or shakes. They may have loss of feeling. They may have nerve pains. They may also have severe cognitive dysfunction, which is, in terms of how bad it is greatly worse than the amount of impairment they have in energy, for instance. Okay. And then an odd symptom sometimes people with Bartonella get is they'll have, often I find people with Bartonella have this internal vibration. It isn't something you can see from the outside, but they feel like they're buzzing or they're vibrating from the inside. All right. So if a person has enough of those symptoms, I might think Bartonella, and I might just treat based on clinical grounds. Sometimes I'll also go ahead and get a Bartonella test. And the test I like using for that, I think the best test these days is IGenex has a method called an Immunoblot. The Immunoblot method looks to see if you have antibodies against 4 specific strains of Bartonella, and in addition, the whole family of Bartonella. So keep in mind, we think there's 15 strains of Bartonella that can infect somebody. And the IGenex looks for 4 specific and then the family. So if the family test comes back positive and your 4 specific ones are negative, just means you got one of the other 11. Okay. But trouble with Bartonella testing is even with IGenex, which I think is the best, it's still going to miss it about 10% of the time. So you got to look, I treat for Bartonella based on clinical signs. And sometimes I'll get the testing just to confirm my clinical suspicion. But if I have strong inkling that they have Bartonella based on the symptoms, I'm going to cover it even if the testing is negative. Okay. All right. Thanks for that question. Oh, and then other things you might do for light sensitivity is, sunglasses, obviously, avoid light. I mean, those aren't good solutions. But the other thing is 2 things to calm agitated nerves. And so sometimes using lithium, vitamin levels of lithium, so something called Lithium Orotate, 5 milligrams 2 or 3 times a day, sometimes can help calm agitated nerves. Something called L-theanine. Theanine is a chemical that comes from green tea. It's not caffeine, and it helps elevate chemicals in your brain called GABA, and GABA can help calm agitated nerves. And if you're to do that, you could take up to about 1,200 milligrams a day. Usually a person starts at 100 milligrams 3 times a day, and depending on how sedating it is to them and how they're tolerating, they can work up to doing 3 or 4 of those 100 milligram pills 3 times a day. Okay, so those are some things you can use to calm those agitated nerves as well while you treat your Lyme and you treat for your possible Bartonella. Bartonella's there. Okay, all right. Thanks for your question, TJ. Good luck to you. Hello, Lynn. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Ross. Last week, I asked you whether elevated mycotoxins on a real-time test indicated that I am one of the 25% of people who can't process mold well, or it just means I've been exposed to mold and I might still be one of the 75% of people who can process it. You said if I don't have symptoms, it could be false positive. But it's complicated because I do have one symptom, pain, which would be attributed to mold or other things. So let's say we assume that the test is accurate. I guess I'm wondering what the results measure. Do they simply measure mold exposure, or are they measurements that reflects a mold processing dysfunction? 2, also, can you say more about a person or an inspector finds out specifically where the mold is coming from in your house once you get the ERMI test done? And 3, lastly, are there air purifiers that remove mycotoxins which are smaller than mold spores? All right, so air purifiers may help get rid of the spores, but they're not going to be a solid line of defense against the toxins. Your best line of defense against the toxins is getting the mold out if it's in your home. In terms of what mold inspectors do, they're skilled at trying to figure out where those mold toxins are coming from. And so if you got an ERMI test, which is a screening test for mold toxicity, comes back high, I would then get a mold inspector out who can try to figure out where the problem is in your home. That's what their skill set is. That's what they're supposed to be doing, okay? And then in terms of mold toxicity, if you do have mold toxins in you and they're being measured because your body's not breaking them down. Okay, because your body should break them down pretty quickly after they get in there. So to answer your question, as you've laid it out here, I would interpret that as saying, yeah, you're probably one of the 25% that is not able to break down the mold toxins correctly. Okay. All right. Good luck to you, Lynn. Hello, Alexander. I see my DNA connection labs came back with testing positive for Lyme, 2 types of Bartonella and Babesia. My doctor also did a Quest Labs Lyme blood test that came up negative. Do you think I have Lyme, or should I test with IGenex for confirmation? My doctor is not sure if I have a Lyme or not. Any advice would be greatly appreciated. Okay, so let's talk about validity of test. Okay, I just want to bring that concept up here first, all right? So a lab that is an independent lab like DNA Connexions that is not making a test kit for resale does not have to have FDA approval over what they do, okay? Companies that make a test kit that they sell to some other lab to use have to be approved by the FDA. And as part of that process, they have to show some studies that say that their test is valid, that it truly does what that test is designed to do, okay? So whenever an independent lab like DNA Connexions or like IGenex comes up with a new testing technique, we as doctors are supposed to call them up on the telephone and say, can you send me your validation studies and the data that prove to me that your test is accurate? All right. So the way a validation study works is you use the test technique like a DNA Connexions or an IGenex Immunoblot, and they basically during the way a validation study is you get samples of blood or urine from people that are known to have the illness, and you collect samples from people that are known not to have the illness, and then you use the testing, the DNA Connexions test, to see of these samples, can they accurately determine which ones have it and which ones don't? Is it valid? Okay. The trouble is with DNA Connexions is they haven't done adequate validation studies on humans. Now you call them up, they'll tell you, oh, the probes that we use have been validated to actually detect the DNA of the germ. And then I said, but have you done it on human samples? And they haven't. Okay. So make sure if you're going to an independent lab that the test has been validated. And what I can tell you is DNA Connexions has not been validated. I have a lot of questions about people that come to me with their labs because they'll come in with a test that says Bartonella and Babesia, for instance. And when I start asking them questions about whether they really have Babesia or Bartonella symptoms, often they have none. And it was at that point years ago that I called up DNA Connexions and said, send me your validation studies, and they couldn't do it. Okay, so I don't trust DNA Connexions. IGenex, on the other hand, has done validation studies on all of their tests. And I can call them up, I can talk to the lab director there, and I can say, let me know about your validation studies. So for instance, on their Bartonella Immunoblot, they've validated it and shown that it can find Bartonella if it's there 90% of the time, okay? So they've got good studies that tell me that they accurately can find what they say they find. And they've tested that, okay? All right. Now, about the lab that would have been done through a regular lab. So the Lyme testing that is done through a regular lab uses a test kit that is approved to be sold by the FDA. So the FDA allows certain companies to produce these test kits, and these test kits have been validated to detect what they're supposed to detect. Okay, now the fact they've been validated doesn't mean they're useful, though. So let me tell you what I mean by that. So the technique that is used by Quest and Pack Lab and all those labs that use FDA-approved test kits uses a technique called a two-step test. And in step one, they take from your blood, they run something called an ELISA panel. And what they're doing with an ELISA is they're asking the question, of all the antibodies that we find in this blood, could some of those been ones that were made against the Lyme germ? Okay, it's a could test, right? And if it comes back and says, yes, they could be, then you do the second step, which is a technique called a Western blot. And the Western blot, what we do with that is we look to see, do your antibodies actually attach to proteins that are found on the covering of a Lyme germ, okay? All right, so let's look at what the validation data says about their test, okay? So there's independent studies that show that the ELISA will miss Lyme 50% of the time. All right, it misses it 50% of the time. So what may have happened is you send your the blood off to the lab, they did the ELISA on it, they said, oh, it's not there, and they didn't go forward and do the second step, which is the Western blot. All right, now the Western blot, the problem with the Western blot, even if you get your doctor to go right to the Western blot, the Western blot has the ability to find chronic Lyme illness there about 60 to 65% of the time. So it's a little bit better, okay? But the lab probably never even went and did it. And even if they did, the problem with that Western blot, the reason it only finds 60 to 65% of Lyme is it's only testing against the original East Coast strain of Lyme from the 70s. We now know there's about 8 different strains of Lyme that infect people in this country. So it's not looking broadly enough, okay? It doesn't look broadly enough, basically, all right? So if I were to do one test to see if you might have tick-borne illnesses, I would do a Lyme germ test. And if that comes back positive, then I would start doing questioning about symptoms to see if I might want to test for Babesia or Bartonella, all right? So I would pay the money to get a good Lyme test done through IGenex. And if that Lyme test came back positive, then I might consider doing a Babesia through IGenex and a Bartonella through IGenex based on whether the symptoms to tell me I need to look for that, okay? So the one Lyme test that I would do through IGenex is I would do their test called an Immunoblot. And what they're doing in the Immunoblot is they're taking they take your blood, and then they look to see if you have antibodies against 8 strains of Lyme germs, okay, number one. Number two, they use cleaned up proteins from these Lyme germs that they grow in the lab in bacteria, basically. And they basically, what I mean by cleaning up these proteins is you can get false positive Lyme tests because the antibodies that stick on Lyme germ proteins sometimes are antibodies that are actually made against viruses that have nothing to do with Lyme, but they happen to cross-attach to Lyme proteins. So what they do when they clean up these proteins is they remove the pieces of the proteins that antibodies made against viruses might attach to. So that when you get a test back positive because antibodies stick on Lyme proteins, these modified proteins, the only way they could be attaching to these modified proteins is because they actually were Lyme antibodies, not virus antibodies, okay? All right, so that technique will find Lyme if you have it about 95% of the time. When it comes back positive, it's 100% accurate, okay? All right, and then if I were to wind up doing testing through IGenex for Bartonella or Babesia, I would do their test called Immunoblot there as well too, for Babesia and for Bartonella. They have good validation studies that show they can find it probably at 90-95% of the time on both of those, okay? That's what I would do. I got to admit, people rush and do these DNA connection studies because it's cheaper, but cheaper doesn't mean it's correct, right? If you want to really find out if you got this illness, you got to pay for a high quality study. Now, when you do the IGenex testing, don't get hoodwinked into doing one of their big panels. So they have these panels where they do PCRs, they do all this stuff that is beyond the Immunoblot. Just get the Immunoblot, and at a minimum, just start by getting the Lyme Immunoblot, okay? All right. Thanks for the question, Alexander. Hi, Robert. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Ross. Thank you very much for your research on peptide therapy and introducing them to us to help with our healing process. You're welcome. I'm on my 4th month with BPC 157, and my neuropathy has diminished quite a bit. Great. I'm glad to hear that. Also, the feeling of having a 50-pound sandbag fall on the back of my neck and shoulders is diminishing. I've started CerebroPep, and so far it seems I have a little better mental focus. Additionally, my tinnitus seems to be slowly going away with more periods of almost quiet. So nice. My question, I have a friend that has had a nerve stroke in one eye. She is getting shots for the retinal nerves when swollen, which stabilizes her good eye, but her doctor said she had the bad eye cannot be fixed. She only sees shadows and large shapes with color wash out in the bad eye. Do you think she might benefit from peptide therapy, or do you happen to hear any discussion in the peptide seminars regarding retinal nerve damage? Thanks. So, everyone, so Robert, thank you. First of all, I'm glad to, thanks for sharing your comments about how these are helping you. And secondly, I'm glad they're helping you. So everyone, let me describe these two peptides first, and I'll answer your question, Robert. So peptides, our bodies naturally make these things called peptides, okay? And we think there's over 100 or so of them that are actually made. Peptides are made up of, the building blocks of peptides are called amino acids. And the Food and Drug Administration has made an artificial determination that if you have less than 40 amino acids put together, we're going to call that a peptide. And if you have more than 40 amino acids put together, we're going to call that a protein. It's just an artificial designation they came up with, okay? And the thing is as a peptide, they don't regulate it as a drug. If it was a protein, they'd regulate it as a drug, okay? All right. So that's why they make that distinction. All right. Now, this BPC-157 is a peptide that is made naturally in our guts, our stomachs. And the purpose of it in the gut is to help repair GI dysfunction downstream, basically. All right. But it's been discovered years ago by athletes that it can do a great job of repairing muscle, tendon, ligament injuries, joint injuries. And because of that, we tend to think of it as something that repairs tissue. And in my practice, I've been seeing it do good results in repairing nerve injury as well, too. So if somebody's got tissue injury of any kind, I'm tending to use BPC-157. Additional things that BPC-157 may help with is to balance the inflammatory processes between what's known as Th1 and Th2, inflammation in the immune system, so they tend to be less inflamed. BPC-157 may help your cell energy factories called mitochondria work better. And BPC-157 may stabilize mast cells to some degree as well, too. Of the peptides that stabilize mast cells, another one called KPV is stronger, okay? But the BPC-157 has the ability to do that, okay? I have not seen, and nor has, so that's BPC-157, all right? So we kind of refer to it as the Swiss Army knife of peptides. In my practice, I'm finding I've put people on it that have decided to stop antibiotics because we just weren't getting anywhere with antibiotics, or we got to a period where they weren't getting all the way better, but I thought we'd done antibiotics long enough. We did everything we could with antibiotics. And I've got a number of patients that getting on the peptides took away the remaining body pain they had, brought back their thinking, took care of their neuropathies. So I've had some good results with it. Not everyone, but probably about 70% of people get some benefits on that BPC-157. Okay. All right. So this is Swiss Army knife. That's the foundation treatment that I usually have people do. Right. This other one that you mentioned, Cerebopep, is the name that a company called Integrated Peptides gives to its a peptide product that is made up of something called cerebrolysin. So the main peptide is actually cerebrolysin. And cerebrolysin is made in the brain, and it's very useful in traumatic brain injury. Now, traumatic can be you got your head hit, okay? It could be that the trauma of the germs injuring your brain, all right? So anything that is traumatic to the nerves of the head, Cerebopep probably can help. Having said that, I haven't seen any studies that say it would help with retinal or with the eye nerve damage, basically. Nor have I seen that it would repair the retina before. I haven't seen that. No one talked about it in my webinars. Or my, not webinars, my training that I did on that, okay? I think it would be worth a try. I don't see any potential downsides in terms of harm from doing it, and there may be benefit from it, okay? If this was a person in my practice, okay, so I'm not trying to be her doctor. All I know is from what you've told me here, okay? But from what you've told me here, I would be thinking of actually doing both a BPC-157 and a Cerebopep together. I might do both together, actually. Okay. All right. Thanks for the question, Robert. All right. So for those of you that are, so I've written an article about the various available oral peptides. Okay. And I'm going to do a quick screen share here and show that to you. All right, so take a look. Actually, I'll just do it up here. We'll do the search bar. Look under peptides. So my article is called Key Oral Peptide Strategies to Repair and Restore in Lyme and Mold Toxicity. Okay. And in here, I go through the various ones that are available orally. All right. So the BBC 157, cerebalysin, KPV. I was talking to you about all of those just a minute ago. Okay. And then down here in the article, I go through a strategy of how you might consider putting some of these together. Okay. All right. Now, the reason, so I want to let you know, these are the ones that are available orally. There also are IV peptides that I know a number of my colleagues are using. That whole area of medicine, I'm a little concerned about doing myself. Okay. And what the issue is that, remember I said that the FDA has decided not to regulate peptides as a drug. All right. But what they do for the IV ones, IV peptides have to be made by compounding pharmacies, and they regulate compounding pharmacies. So although they don't regulate the drug, they regulate the compounding pharmacies that make them. And the compounding pharmacies, to be able to make something, they have whatever they're making has to be on a list that is approved by the FDA. And the FDA decides whether to let a compounding pharmacy produce something or not based on whether there is adequate safety data and some data that shows the potential benefit. And at this point, the FDA has collected information about peptides, the IV peptides, but has not ruled on whether these things are valid or not. Okay. So with my medical board in Washington State, I remember I had my problems with my medical board for treating Lyme out here, right? And I could see how this one would play out, because what the medical board would tell me, and I know because I went through my whole period with them, is if they started having concern about peptides, the first thing they would ask me is it FDA approved? And to be honest, they're not FDA approved. And my board would not hear the whole argument about, well, it's on a list that they're allowing the pharmacies to make right now because they haven't ruled on it yet. My board would care less about that. The only thing they want to know is it FDA approved? Okay. And so for compounding pharmacies to produce, and it's not. So I choose not to take the licensure risk by doing that. Okay. But I will let you know, there are a number of other injectable peptides that could be beneficial to people. I just choose not to do them here in my practice because of the risk with my medical board, basically. All right. All right. Thanks for the question. Hello, Colleen. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Ross. Clarifying a previous question. Are oxalate an issue with Lyme? My blood work came back with high oxalate, so I was sent to a specialist who tested my kidney function, and my kidneys were fine, so he sent me home with no other instructions. Do oxalates hurt Lyme patients? If oxalates are still high, should I do things like not eating spinach, etc.? Or maybe oxalates don't matter as long as your kidney function is fine? I'm not sure. Thanks for these webinars. All right. So there's differing opinions. I'm not a big believer in oxalates being a problem. I'll just say that. All right. On the other hand, there is a practitioner out here named in the Seattle area called Dietrich Klinghardt, who believes strongly that any elevations in oxalates means that you need to modify your diet to remove the potential for that source. Okay. That's his opinion. I haven't seen any decent data that supports his opinion, but if you start reading about it, you'll find people both sides of it. If your urine numbers look good, I tend not to worry about it, to be honest with you. All right. Thanks for the question. Hello, Monica. Let's see, which of these mole toxicity, yeast, Lyme bark, Babesia cause itchy, red, dry patches on the skin? I have some in a few parts on my body and in different places. All right. So itchy, dry patches like you're describing. Now you're describing, okay, ultimately to figure out skin, I have to look at it. All right. So thanks for your description. What you're describing sounds like, I hope you hear I'm saying that. Okay. I can't be sure. Okay. But it sounds like these are eczematous patches basically. And eczematous patches are usually like an allergic skin reaction triggered more by what's going on internally within you. And the thing that would probably have the greatest chance of setting that off would be yeast, intestinal yeast overgrowth. Okay. All right. Now, I hope you heard all the caveats that I just gave you there, because I can't look at it. I can't tell for sure that the opinion I just gave you is correct. But that's what it sounds like. Okay. All right. Good luck to you, Monica. You might want to, take it and show it to your family doctor. Family doctors can diagnose eczema. They don't have to know about Lyme and everything else, but they can figure out eczema. Okay. All right. Good luck to you. Hello, Jackie. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Marty. For very severe yeast overgrowth, how long have you seen treatment last? I note your guidance is for treat for 2 months, and all told, I've been doing this for many more. For background, I've been extensively treated for Lyme, Bartonella, Babesia, mold, and heavy metals. I believe I developed a yeast overgrowth issue more than 30 years ago following a tick bite as a child. And after being given antibiotics for what was considered to be a mono-infection, I've treated yeast with nystatin, itraconazole, voriconazole, and now amphotericin B. Each time we stopped treatment too soon and then tried something else. I've seen an oral disease doctor that isolated Candida krusei and tropicalis via an Ororisk Candida report from oral DNA labs. My MD prescribed Ampho B 250 milligrams times 2, 3 times a day, and I'm cycling between being unable to function due to severe die-off, cytokines, until I take a few days break. I therefore stopped myself down to 250 milligrams times 1, 3 times a day, and began quercetin and liposomal. I think there's a second part here. Oh, so he was prescribing you 500 milligrams 3 times a day, and you were having bad reactions, so you dropped yourself down to 250 milligrams 3 times a day. All right, I'm going to see if I can follow the second part of your question here, Jackie. All right, so you wrote it twice. So here's another. So I'm not going to read the whole thing again, but in the bottom here you say, and began quercetin, liposomal curcumin, activated charcoal clay. Would you suggest that the RX dosage is too high? And do you have any other recommendations, including treatment for severe infection? Thanks. All right. So there is a rare person that I have in my practice that has a situation similar to yours, which is after having gone through the antibiotics to get Lyme under control, there is such a disruption that happened to the gut microbiome that they tend to get repeated yeast infections. And so my all hands on deck approach for people that get repeated yeast infections that keep coming back is usually to do amphotericin at a level you can tolerate. All right. And that could even be 2 to 4, even 6 months at a time. I've done that before. And when I say to tolerate, if you're having this strong of a reaction on it, which sounds like a Herxheimer reaction, you might start at 250 milligrams 1 time a day. After the Herx lifts, then you might do 250 milligrams 3 times a day. And after the Herx lifts again, you might do 250 milligrams 3 times a day. So start at 1 time a day, Herx, get it over with. When it's done after a number of days, a week or so, then go up to 1 pill twice a day. If you Herx again, let it go away. Keep taking the pill, but let it go away. And then go up to 1 pill 3 times a day. So 250 milligrams 3 times a day. Okay. Other things that you need to do to get yeast under control is there's a concept I like calling weed, seed, and feed. Okay. So weeding means knocking the load of the yeast down. That's what you're doing with the amphotericin B. All right. And it may be you need to do 4 to 6 months of it. I've had to do that before. Number 2, seeding means put good bacteria in to help compete against your the yeast. Okay. And so I like using combination of both soil-based probiotics and human strains of probiotics. So human strains would be similar to the ones that live in your gut. Soil ones are ones that are found in the soil. And the soil-based probiotics may or may not gain a foothold in your intestines, but what they do is they help your existing bacteria work better in your intestines, and they help the ones you're taking orally to gain a foothold, the human strains to gain a foothold, okay? The products I like there's 2 ways you can go. One is to use a product made by Seborrheic called HMF Forte. And in situations like this, I go really heavy. I go 4 pills, 1 time a day of that. That's your human strains. It has to be refrigerated. And then for the soil-based strains, I like using something called Core Biotic by Research Nutritionals. And I do 4 pills 1 time a day of that. Okay. The alternative to doing those 2 products is to do the Research Nutritionals product called Multibiome, which is made up of human strains and soil-based strains. And I usually have people taking 4 pills 1 time a day of that. Okay. So, but get both of those strains in. Okay. All right. Then the feeding part means you need to do things to support the good bacteria in your intestines to work correctly, to fight back those yeast and to gain a foothold. Okay. And so what good bacteria in your intestines need to thrive, and these would be things that even after you're done with the amphotericin, you need to stay on for a good year or 2. Just you need to emphasize foods in your diet that are rich in soluble fiber, or take a soluble fiber supplement. Okay. So foods that are rich in soluble fiber are avocado, broccoli, Brussels sprouts, asparagus. I'll show you an article here in a minute, but there's a number of foods that are just rich in soluble fiber. Okay. Or you can do a supplement, and what's rich in soluble fiber is citrus pectin. And there is a supplement called modified citrus pectin, and you can do 1 scoop twice a day. Okay. So feed the good bacteria with soluble fiber. In addition, you need to limit your carbohydrate and sugar intake. And in situations like this, I'd like to put people on a plant-forward paleo diet. And the reason I like doing that is a plant-forward paleo diet does not have in it beans and legumes and grains. Okay, those are your carbs. You're going to limit those carbs so you're not feeding your yeast as well too. And you may need to do that for a year or 2 as well. Okay, now when you get done with your amphotericin B after 4 to 6 months, if you're doing well, then you need to switch over to doing some policing or I have my patients switch over to policing the yeast while I'm still dumping all those probiotics in, and I'm still dumping all the soluble fiber in. Okay. And I like to do something to still swat the yeast down, but I do that usually with plant-based products. So I'll do like a Capri Plus that I mentioned earlier tonight, 2 pills twice a day. Okay. Now, it's a hard problem. And what I've just outlined is a hard approach, right? But it's a way of trying to weed, knock them down, seed them, put good stuff back in your gut again, and feed them healthy. So don't give them a bunch of sugar, right? Take your beans with legumes and grains out, and then give them the soluble fiber. Okay. So let me show you an article you can look at where all of this is written down to some detail, including a good list of soluble fiber foods to emphasize in your diet as well too. All right. So take a look in my yeast section. And this article called Kills and Prevents Yeast. All right. And down here, I talk about my weed, seed, and feed approach. Okay. And you'll see it mirrors what I just told you here, basically. Okay. So the plant, in terms of the foods that are rich in soluble fiber, these include avocados, soy nuts. That's what I was forgetting. Oat bran, Brussels sprouts, sweet potatoes, a good source, asparagus, and broccoli. Okay, you can read it all right here, basically. Okay, all right. Or your other option is to do something called citrus pectin. And let me show that to you here real quick. All right, so this is my supplement store. Again, anyone can buy. This is where my patients get their products. But if you're wondering, what do I recommend that's high quality, take a look here and feel free to buy from here. Again, I don't charge, I cover your state and local sales taxes, so we don't have that. And if you order products over $50, then I pay for your shipping as well too. Okay. All right. All right. So the pectin powder, the product I like for that is this one by Allergy Research. okay, modified citrus pectin. And my patients that really have difficulty with the yeast, I'll usually wind up doing 1 or 2 scoops a day. So 1 scoop once a day or 1 scoop twice a day, okay? All right. Jackie, good luck to you. It's a hard problem. It's a not common problem, but it's a hard problem when it's your problem, okay? All right, so good luck to you. Hello, Kate. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Ross. Thanks so much for these amazing webinars. Do you ever get tired of hearing that? No, I don't tire of it. Thank you for saying so, though. I appreciate the comment. Thank you. Let's see. I have a few questions. I know you must get this one often, but I'm very concerned about my Mycoplasma antibodies. They've been chronically high for 3 years, and this is even after treating Lyme in 2020 and been Lyme-free since 2020. Is there anything I should do or try? I don't have any symptoms, but I'm worried. My IgG is 4 times the upper limit, and IgM is quite high. Is azithromycin worth trying, or herbals, or just nothing? How can you know if you have PANS or PANDAS? I have OCD, but no other symptoms, but sometimes I worry. Thanks so much. Okay, so Mycoplasma is controversial. Now, I know there's a number of my colleagues that are like, if you have antibodies, you need to treat Mycoplasma, and I disagree. So let's talk about why I disagree, okay? So Mycoplasma pneumoniae and something called Chlamydia pneumoniae are 2 intracellular infections that are found in healthy people. And that's what the issue is. I could pull 100 healthy people off the street and find laboratory evidence in a high percentage of those people of Chlamydia pneumoniae and Mycoplasma pneumoniae because they would have elevated antibodies. And these are healthy people. All right. So some of my colleagues interpret the high antibodies to mean that the germ must be active. I interpret it differently. I interpret it to mean, gosh, your immune system's doing a great job and has those germs under control. All right. So these are germs we probably don't ever wipe out. They cohabitate in us. And just because you find antibodies does not mean it's causing you a problem. During your Lyme treatment, if you were on, and even if they were a problem, during your Lyme treatment, your doctors should have put you on some antibiotics that reached Lyme in the intracellular space, inside cells, okay? And those would be antibiotics like doxycycline, tetracycline, minocycline, azithromycin, clarithromycin, rifampin, rifabutin, Bactrim. Any of those antibiotics can treat Lyme, intracellular Lyme, but guess what they cover too? Mycoplasma, right? So probably, even if I'm wrong, that great for you, you got great antibodies keeping the germs under control. Let's say I'm wrong, you were probably treated for Mycoplasma as part of your Lyme treatment. Okay, all right. The other thing is, just because a test comes back positive, a test true indication of having an active illness is only as reliable as the symptoms you have. You got false positive. You got false positive antibody titers too, okay? So a test reliability, the ability for that test to truly predict you have a problem that it's detecting, goes up if you have a lot of symptoms of that illness. And what you're telling me here is you don't have symptoms of the illness, okay? So I don't agree with my colleagues that say antibodies mean high germ load. Antibodies mean you have a problem. I think antibodies can mean your immune system is doing what it's designed to do. And with a lot of these intracellular infections, we're designed to cohabitate with them, just like we live with germs on our skin, all right? So I'm not a big believer in going after Mycoplasma, and you don't seem to have symptoms of it as well too, okay? All right. In terms of PANS or PANDAS, those are illnesses that one cause of the PANS and PANDAS is a strep infection. Another could be Bartonella may trigger PANDAS as well too. Okay, so the hallmark symptom of PANS or PANDAS is major psychiatric issues, not occasional worry, but hallucinations, severe OCD, severe depression, severe anxiety, then I might start thinking about PANS or PANDAS. But beyond that, you got to have more going on. You got to have some pretty significant psychiatric issues for me to be able to say that that's PANS or PANDAS, basically. Okay. All right. I'm going to do a quick screen share here because I want to look at some statistics that I'm not remembering on top of my head. Okay, so I have an article that is about should you treat Mycoplasma and Chlamydia and some of the chronic virus infections, okay? So take a look at my infection treatment plan section here. Okay, here we go. So the article is called Target Viruses, Mycoplasma, and Chlamydia and Lyme. Maybe not. Okay. All right. And in here, let's see. Bear with me. I'm trying to find the statistic here. Okay. So science says that about 5% of healthy people have evidence of Chlamydia pneumoniae or Mycoplasma living in them. Okay. So it's actually 5% of healthy people have elevated antibodies against Chlamydia and Mycoplasma. These are healthy people. For Epstein-Barr and HHV6, nearly, those are two viruses. Epstein-Barr is a monovirus. HHV6 is a respiratory herpes virus. Nearly 90% of all people have positive testing for it. These are healthy people, all right? And CMV, 60% of healthy people, all right? So I know my colleagues all want to go after their EBVs and their HHV6s and their CMVs, but guess what? Healthy people live with this stuff. So just finding elevated antibodies does not prove that these germs are running rampant in you. And the problem with the viruses and the problem with Chlamydia pneumoniae and Mycoplasma pneumonia is we don't have adequate testing that tells us what the germ load is. Because ultimately what we worry about is do you have too many germs in you? Our ability, what we have the ability to test for really is your immune reaction, which is your antibody levels. And that's, we use antibody levels to say you must have the germ in you and must be active. But what really tells us whether the germ is active is what your germ load is. And we don't have adequate ways of measuring Chlamydia pneumoniae, Mycoplasma pneumonia, Epstein-Barr virus, cytomegalovirus, HHV6 germ loads. We just don't. All right. So again, I think some of my colleagues falsely believe that an elevated antibody means the germ's active or that you have high germ load. I think you can easily make the argument that says, nope, just means your immune system is doing its job. Okay. All right. Anyhow, I'll stop beating that horse there. Okay. All right. Good luck to you, Kate. Hello, Brandy. Let's see. I have the same rash as you did last week. Have you found anything to help trigger it? So everyone, last week, my face was just, during the webinar, I had a lot of peeling going on right here. And so there's a condition that's common. It's a family medicine primary care problem that I just happen to have. It's called seborrheic dermatitis. And with seborrhea, you tend to get breakouts of a rash, red peeling, dry skin rash here, down in here, sometimes in men down in the beard line, up in the eyebrow areas as well too, behind the ears, in the ears, and up on your scalp. And when it occurs on the scalp, we call that dandruff. Okay, so dandruff is seborrheic dermatitis. And as you know, it's a common problem, okay? So I tend to keep it under control by using anti-dandruff shampoos. And so one way that you can manage, and this is what I used to do with my family medicine practice as well too, is you just take like a Head and Shoulders or a Selsun Blue and you lather up a little bit in your palm and you take the lathered amount of it and you put it in these areas, wherever you break out, put it in there as daily, as part of your shower bathing routine, and put it, the longer that the bubbles and the stuff has contact, the better. So I usually will start at the beginning of getting in the shower, the tub, and then wash it off wait as long as I can to wash it off. Okay. So that's what I use to control things. Okay. When you get a bad outbreak of it, a next step can sometimes be to use a hydrocortisone cream or a hydrocortisone ointment to keep it under control. There were some reasons why mine flared up last week, which I won't get into, but there were some reasons that it flared up, but it's all back under better control right now. And I'm just keeping it under control using my dandruff shampoos. Okay. Now, sometimes if you're a person that things are going well and it suddenly does go haywire, that sometimes can be a sign of intestinal yeast overgrowth, actually, which wasn't happening with me last week, but it can sometimes be a sign of intestinal yeast overgrowth. Okay. All right. All right. Also, if you have dysbiosis, if you have an imbalance of good bacteria in your gut, sometimes it can lead to that as well, too. Okay. All right. So anyhow, there you go. Thanks for that question, Brady. Hello, Dave. Let's see. 2823 question. Let's see. Dr. Ross, thank you for your devoted time to us. Lyme. You're welcome. My question is about the L form of Borrelia. Once it sheds its outer coat and enters the cell, can it come out of the cell and reform into the spirochetal cyst form? If not, could this be the reason why the chronically ill never get better due to the increasing population of the L form? Is it okay to mix the Japanese knotweed with the otoba bark and cat's claw in a cocktail and take them together all at once? So, okay, so the Japanese knotweed, otoba bark, and cat's claw are all liquid tinctures. They can be all taken together at the same time. You can put them in the same glass if you want to, put them in with some water and drink them down. You can squirt them all in, just drink them without mixing them in water. But yeah, you can take them all at the same time. I have my patients do it that way. So my understanding of the L form of Lyme, so the Lyme, let me do a Lyme discussion of terms first, okay? So the Lyme germ has different ways that looks and appearances, okay? So those appearances are a spirochete. You've seen pictures of that. It's that corkscrew-looking thing. The spirochete can morph into these microscopic little balls, and we call that the cyst. And then the germ can move inside of cells, lose its covering, and inside the cells we call it an L form, all right? My understanding is all of these forms can change one back to the other, basically, okay? They go back and forth. That's my understanding of it, at least, okay? All right. Then the other terms on top of that are the words persisters, okay? So what's a persister? So a persister describes the growth state of the germ, not what it looks like, but what its growth phase is, okay? And Lyme germs have two growth phases. They're either growing, all right, or they're hibernating, and we call those hibernators persisters. Probably about 10% of the germs can go into these hibernation forms or are in hibernation forms. At least that's what some of the laboratory evidence would tell us, okay? And the thing about the hibernator persisters that is catching our attention is we realize that a lot of the traditional antibiotics we've used in the past to deal with Lyme didn't have agents in it that dealt anything with persisters. And discovering persisters, that's kind of an in vogue idea right now, that we think if we get rid of persisters, that's going to be the thing that's been keeping people sick. And maybe that's so. I think it's a little bit too early to tell. These days, though, so I try to design my treatments with something in them that will also deal with persisters while I'm dealing with the growing phases of the germ. Okay. So cyst could be persister cyst. Spirochetes could be persister spirochetes. Regarding the L form, because we can't really look inside the cell, it's hard to tell whether they're growing or persisting in there. I don't know that one for sure. Okay. All right. And so what I like using for persisters is either liposomal cinnamon clove oregano for my Lyme and my Bartonella patients. You could also use some Japanese knotweed. You could use cryptolepis. Those are herbal ways to deal with those persisters. Cat's claw actually can deal with persister, at least laboratory evidence says it will deal with persister Lyme as well too, okay? And then the drugs that deal with persisters are disulfiram, dapsone, and methylene blue. I tend to go the least toxic way of doing it, so I tend to work more with the liposomal cinnamon clove oregano, okay? All right. Thanks for that question, Dave. So for more information, I just spilled a lot of stuff out there about persisters. If you're wanting to know more about persisters and the agents that you can add to your treatment to deal with persisters, take a look in my infection treatment plan section here and take a look at this article called How to Treat Persister Lyme and Bartonella, okay? All right. Or one other thing you could do. I have to do this at least once. All right. So this is my new book. All right. So Hacking Lyme Disease, a guide. Oh, I guess I should pull it back. Hacking Lyme Disease, a guide to wellness. All right. And what this is a compilation of nearly 40 of my key articles from Treat Lyme. Okay. So there's an opening section in here that tells you some key things I think you need to do to get well, and information you should be doing before you start getting treated. Okay. And in there, I talk about evidence that from the California Lyme Disease or the LymeDisease.org, where they've done studies showing what are key factors that determine whether you get well. I also describe what you need to do to protect your gut. And in there, I review key reasons that treatment fails so that you avoid those steps. Okay. So that's the opening of the book. Second part of the book is my treatment protocol. Third part of my book is the infection treatment plans for every one of the germs. So Lyme, Borrelia, Babesia, Ehrlichia, Anaplasma, viruses, C. difficile, parasites, all of that's in there. Okay. The fifth section of my book is a review of various alternative medicine treatments like Rife machines, SOT, ozone treatments, etc. Okay. And then the last part of the book is a review of key drugs that we might use, like disulfiram and dapsone. Okay, so you can either look at the stuff on the website or get my book. Okay, and where you can find the book, you can find it at my supplement store at Marty Ross MD Supplements. Let me show you that here. So if you go here at my store to the books page, and there it is. All right. So the advantage, so you can either buy it from me, from my store, or you could go to Amazon and get it. You can go either way. However, if you get it from me, I'm not going to charge you taxes. And if you buy it along with something else and your total order is over $50, there's no shipping charge. Okay. All right. So anyhow, I just want to let you know, I just want to plug my book here, but it's got everything in probably an easier form to read than my online information as well too. And if you buy it, I appreciate your support. All right. All right. So I had to do my plug on my book tonight. Hello, Lisa. This is my first time in this chat. Welcome. Welcome here. How does it work? I'm sorry to be getting to you so late. We got about 12 minutes left. So the way I think I explained at the beginning, you just got to write a question to me down at the bottom of the chat box there. Anyhow, I hope you're still here, and I hope you've learned some things tonight. Hello, Owen. Why can't we handle sugar? Does this damage some digestion metabolism? So it's not everyone that can't handle sugar. The reason that I try to limit simple sugars primarily in people with Lyme is that I don't want to feed their yeast while they have them on herbal or prescription antibiotics. But in my experience, most people handle sugar just fine, actually. So I'm not sure. I would need to know more information about what's happened with you specifically so I could answer that one for you, Owen. Good luck. Cynthia Caring says, hi, Dr. Ross. Hello, Cynthia. Hello, Carter. Let's see if you heard anything about DesBio. It seems to be popular on forums for Lyme and Bart. So DesBio is a system of homeopathic treatments for, my understanding is it's a system of homeopathic treatments. I think homeopathy is good support. I don't think homeopathy is going to get somebody well. All right. So if you're using it in addition to other things you're using to kill the germ, it may give you some benefit. So the reason I say that, so I mentioned this earlier, it's in the opening part of my book too. But one thing that we know is that this group called LymeDisease.org and their project called My Lyme Data. My Lyme Data has over about 16,000 people enrolled in it now. And basically these are people living with Lyme. And periodically My Lyme Data will ask them questions and try to study something, okay? So a number of years ago, they did a study they asked people, what did it take to get you well? All right. And the overwhelming evidence was being on antibiotics. Now, they didn't ask them, were you on herbal antibiotics? And I think herbal antibiotics also would work too. But the key point is you needed to be on germ killers. All right. So it wasn't a Rife machine that got people better. It wasn't ozone treatments that got people better. It wasn't SOT treatments that got people better. It wasn't all that kind of stuff that people do. It wasn't stem cell treatments that got people better. It was going in and spending time killing germs. Okay, that's what got people better. All right. The other key findings from that study is that it took a year or more of being persistent with your antibiotics. And again, I would say herbal antibiotics with that as well too. And then the third key finding is that it took working with a Lyme literate condition, somebody that can help weave through the ins and outs of the illness with you. Okay. All right. So the Des Bio, on the other hand, would fall into the homeopathy camp. And I think I think they looked at that too. Let's look at this together. Let's see if homeopathy was part of it. So there were actually two studies that they did, that My Lyme Data did, and I've written about them collectively in one article. It's in this key info tab over here. All right, it's this article called What Works, Navigating Prescription and Alternative Medicine Lyme Treatments. Okay, so the second study that was done was looking specifically at alternative medicines. And people were asked, did they have any problems with the alternative medicines, and did the alternative medicines work? And that is this chart right here. And I know you may have a hard time seeing this, but I'm trying to see if homeopathy is. Yeah. Okay, so homeopathy is this one I'm circling right here. And 55% of people said that they found it to be helpful. Okay. All right. So that's pretty good. That's pretty good. But again, there are other studies says that's not what got a person well. What got a person well was killing germs with antibiotics. Okay. All right. Thanks for the question. Good luck to you. Hello, Karen. Let's see. Good morning from Australia. Good morning. You got up early. Let's see. I was diagnosed with a BMS 20 years ago and tried everything possible to find a cure. Recently, while seeking my doctor, she commented that my eyes were red and inflamed. Here's the second part to that question. This is a constant problem along with burning mouth. I also have silent reflux. She suggested I take anti-inflammatories twice a day. This seemed to help. I then remembered it was 20 years ago I was bitten by a tick and found out I was highly allergic. My tongue swelled immensely. The itch was unbearable. Attending hospital and given Phenergan to help sleep. 12 months late, my doctor made an incision at the site and it was still itchy. The most recent diagnosis, excess histamines. Karen, I don't see a question here. Oh. Oh, I see. Okay, hold on. Sorry, my question kept sending before I finished. As I hit enter new to the, see, I read your article on mast cell histamines Lyme and hope you could assist me. Okay. Boy, I know you wrote a lot of questionnaire. The trouble is, I don't have a sense of what you're asking. I wish I did. I mean, you did write a lot of things to me, but I'm not sure if your question is, could your very allergic reactions be triggered by Lyme leading to mast cell, which is possible. But I would also, if your question is that you have a lot of allergic reactions to things and you're wondering what to do about it, keep in mind there are many things that trigger your mast cells. Okay, so Lyme can trigger it, mold toxicity can trigger it, stress can trigger it. Okay, so keep that in mind. If your question is, could Lyme be giving you all of your problems? I would need to know more about what all of your problems are. Okay, I would need to spend time asking you a lot of questions. Unfortunately, this forum doesn't work out well to deal with really complex, what's going on with me kind of questions. It works out better for me to be able to ask very targeted, answer very targeted questions. Okay, so I don't know how to respond to this one tonight, Karen. But thank you for trying to post a question here. I apologize I'm not able to help you here. Good luck to you. Two questions. What are your thoughts on using Arginine against Bartonella and Babesia? It is a key supplement in the Buhner protocols. If used, is lysine needed to ensure any viruses don't flare? And if taking both, can they be taken at the same time, as there is some info about them canceling each other out or competing in the same way? Would certain types of tick infections be more probably be sexually transmitted? I know the science is lacking, and I read your thoughts on Lyme, but what about Bartonella or Babesia? Okay, so in terms of Arginine, Arginine is used to cause blood vessel dilation, and the idea is that that would make it easier for the herbal antibiotics or even prescription antibiotics to reach deep into the tissues and into the very small blood vessels to get at Bartonella Babesia. That's the theory that Buhner has in using that. As to whether it makes a difference, I don't know. I don't use it in any of my protocols, so I can't say for sure. Lysine has got some evidence that it's useful at preventing herpes viruses, but I'm not sure that it does anything else for any other kind of viruses, okay? So what I would say about your Buhner herbs questions, I don't know. I haven't done this type of that approach in my Bartonella treatments and find that I don't need to, actually. So as to whether it's needed or not, I don't know. I mean, the one thing about Buhner is a master herbalist, and unfortunately he has passed away now. I think many of you know that, recently passed away. But in some ways, he almost threw too many things at a problem. Every one of his ideas is very well thought out, has a very strong rationale for how it would work, but I'm not convinced you need to do all that. And you know, if you've looked at his protocols, you'll know how extensive they can be. I'm not sure you need to do all these things, including an Arginine or lysine, okay? I don't, and people get well without doing that, okay? All right, let's see, okay, in terms of the sexually transmitted issue, you know, we think that Lyme can be. I will tell you though, if it is, my opinion is it's probably low chance of it being sexually transmitted. We don't have any hard science that says it is. We also wonder if Bartonella might be, just because there are other bacteria similar to it that can be transmitted, but we don't have any hard science on it. So I can't say for sure whether it is or not, okay? Babesia, I have no reason to believe it is, based on what the germ is like. And so I counsel my patients that we don't know for Lyme and Bartonella, but I think that the probability are extremely low. That's my opinion on that. Okay. All right. Thanks, Jason, for that question. Good luck to you. All right, everyone. That's it for me for tonight. I've enjoyed being with you here tonight. We've spent an hour and a half here now, and I need to get out and take care of 2 dogs and get myself some exercise in here for the day. So I enjoyed being here with you. I hope you'll join me again here next week. Tomorrow morning, keep your eye out on your email, somewhere between 9:30 a.m. You'll get an email from me, that's Pacific Standard Time. You'll get an email from me saying that the recording is ready to be watched, and I'll have a summary that will go out with that too. In that email will also be an opportunity to sign up for next week's webinar. I hope you'll join me then too. And again, as I requested earlier tonight, send that email to anyone you think is going to get some benefit by either looking at the recording for tonight or for signing up for next week's webinar too. Okay? All right. Good night, everyone.